Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the center of Keene for today's celebration of the 100th birthday of Nelson Mandela. Round of applause. Today we celebrate a man who became a politician, who became a prisoner, who became a president, who fought for freedom across South and all of Africa. With his pride and in his respect, we celebrate his 100th birthday. Up first, we will have Esther Rhodes, the artistic director for GMYC, with the purpose for today's event.
Hello, everybody! Thank you for being here to help us celebrate Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday. Nelson Mandela has been an inspiration to so many people, including myself. He is a peacemaker, and I believe strongly that peace is the way forward. I would like to read to you a message from the South African Consulate General in New York. It is with profound joy and a humble heart that I heard about the Grand Monadnock Youth Choir's enthusiasm and willingness to participate in the global celebration of Nelson Mandela's centenary celebration in the city of Keene. 2018 is an amazing year for all South Africans and our friends around the globe as we celebrate the lives of two great stalwarts in South Africa's rich history, namely Nelson Mandela, Madiba, as he is well known in South Africa, and Albertina Sisulu. Madiba's legacy includes ushering South Africa out of the clutches of apartheid and strengthening the unity of the country to avoid a civil war and ensure a peaceful transition to a democratic and respected global actor. The great shadow of Madiba is still covering our beautiful country with old and new stories, still being told about a person that was willing to die for the freedom of all people in South Africa. Mandela's best-known speech, delivered in 1964 from the dock of a Pretoria courtroom, expresses the depths of sacrifice that he and other comrades were willing to go through during times of oppression. During my lifetime, I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But, my Lord, if it needs to be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. One of Nelson Mandela's passions was to advocate for the youth, especially the very young ones who are a future generation that needs to be nurtured, loved, and educated to become honorable citizens and leaders this world so desperately needs. Madiba's passion and drive even reached the ears of the United Nations, and thus an international day has been dedicated to his legacy today, the 18th of July, 2018. This sparked a worldwide awareness campaign that the Grand Monadnock Youth Choirs and you all are participating in, and has been dedicated, to offer our time to the less fortunate and to live a life of love and respect for our neighbors. The youth has become a main focus point for the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Madiba's belief in the importance of fighting for a peaceful, prosperous, and just world has become the cornerstone of South Africa's engagement with people, both within South Africa and on the international stage. As the Consul General of South Africa, I would like to take this opportunity to humbly thank you for inviting me to be part of the global music event celebrating our beloved Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday. Please remember, as you present songs of freedom and peace, that the people of South Africa are your biggest supporters. And now I'd like to introduce Rissa, who's going to sing a little bit of history about Nelson Mandela for you.
In 1994, South African President de Klerk allowed free election. Nelson Mandela became the first black president, demonstrating apartheid was ending.
And now I'd like to invite Mayor Kendall Lane up.
Thank you. First off, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. We've got a beautiful day, and this is a really important event as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela. It's important to recognize that not only did he lead South Africa out of apartheid, but he was a unifier. He was a unifier that brought together many diverse populations in South Africa into a single unified country. And we all should celebrate the peace and the success that he had. I also want to welcome the Grand Monadnock Youth Choir here today and thank them for coming here to help us celebrate Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday. And I have a proclamation that I would like to read. Whereas the Grand Monadnock Youth Choir was formed in 1998 as an organization to promote choral music education among youth in grades 2 through 12. And whereas the Grand Monadnock Youth Choirs believe that music encourages literacy for children whose love of singing positively impacts their skills in reading, comprehension, team building, and community engagement. And whereas the Cecilia Ensemble, comprised of high school girls, have traveled to Europe 10 times as role models and ambassadors of the United States to engage in global unity through music. And whereas in 2018, the 100th year Mandela celebration by the Long Walk to Freedom recognizes the 100th birthday of Mandela, who declared, "It's music and dancing that makes me at peace with the world." And whereas GMYC believes it is important for local rural communities to meaningfully engage with global community partners. And whereas GMYC supports the educational goals of the school's library project, which changes the lives of tens of thousands of children in South Africa. And whereas GMYC holds literacy, music, and peaceful world collaboration as its core mission. Now therefore let it be known that Wednesday, July 18th, 2018, be proclaimed as Music is Literacy Day to honor the life of humanitarian, visionary, and peacemaker Nelson Mandela. In witness whereof, I hereby set my hand and the official seal of the City of Keene this 18th day of July, 2018. So, thank you all for being here.
Maybe 2 inches back. Woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I'm gonna walk, walk,
Hands up. Between each song, we're going to be hearing a quote by Nelson Mandela, followed by a reflection. The quote was chosen by each of these children, and the reflection was written by each of these children. This is Lauren Graham.
People come and go. Fashions, customs, and preferences change. Yet the web of fundamental rights and justice, which a nation proclaims, must not be broken. I think that even when things change, human rights are important all the same, and that black or white, we are all human. To quote one of my favorite songs, "Don't stop believing, hold on to that feeling." I think that with politics and stuff today, I think that we forget that we are all human and we are all the same in one way or another.
This little light.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Join us everywhere I go.
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
All around the world.
All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
This little light.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Our children are the rock on which our future will be built. Our greatest asset is a nation. They will be the leaders of our country, the creators of our national wealth, those who care for and protect our people. This quote was said on June 3rd, 1995 by Nelson Mandela. I personally feel that this quote is very empowering and a great reminder that you too at some point have thought, if you have a child, wow, they would make such a great leader. This quote from Nelson Mandela is true. Us children are the next presidents, the next leaders, the next adults. And we will build up the future and pass it on to our children, and they will pass it on to theirs, and so on. We will be the ones who continue to build the nation until we pass it on to our children. And then our children will build the nation. And we will care for and protect the people in our country. That's why I believe that this quote is both so empowering and a great reminder, because we are the ones who will build the future.
That is Aaron Boone. How good at clapping are we? Here we go. So I need your help to do this. Oh, when the saints, like that, okay? It helps if you go like marching first like this. Oh, when the saints go, but that helps a lot. So you can try that. So you don't clap, I think.
You don't do anything. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, how I want to be in their number. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, when the drums begin to bang. Oh, when the drums begin to bang. Oh, how I want
many have suffered for the love of freedom. I cannot sell my birthright, nor am I prepared to sell the birthright of my people to be free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated. This quote reminds me of all the people in the world who work extremely hard without any recognition or chance to move ahead. People who pick our berries and bananas and tomatoes, who work long hours making our clothing, cleaning our hotel rooms, and just making sure our world runs smoothly, and who hardly ever get recognized for their labor. And I think about all the small things we can do to make the world a better place for all of us. Things like picking up trash by the side of the road, volunteering at a local food pantry, or even just smiling at the janitor. All of these things make a difference. All people matter, and every one of us deserves to be free.
That was Hannah Spindler. So can you walk? Lauren, can you spit that out, please? That she's saying the time. I don't know, put in your hand. You shouldn't be doing it. Can you step forward as well? Walk together. Bailey, can you come in a little bit? Yeah. Walk.
Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Gonna walk and never tire. Walk and never tire. Walk and never tire. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Sing together, children, don't you get weary. Sing together, children, don't you get weary. Sing together, children, don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Gonna sing and never tire. Sing and never tire. Sing and never tire. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Work together, children, don't you get weary. Work together, children, don't you get weary. Work together, children, don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Gonna walk and never tire. Walk and never tire. Walk and never tire. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land.
Indigo Goldman.
Africa shed her blood and surrendered the lives of her children so that all her children could be free. She gave of her limited wealth and resources so that all of Africa should be liberated. She opened her heart of hospitality and her head so full of wise counsel so that we shall emerge victorious. 1,000,000 times she put her hand to the plow that has now dug up the encrusted burden of oppression accumulated for centuries. If freedom was the crown which the fighters of liberation sought to place on the head of Mother Africa, let the upliftment, the happiness, prosperity, and comfort of her children be the jewel of the crown. I think it's inspiring to hear someone standing strong about their opinion and, however hard it is, keeping their word.
Would you join us in singing Lift Every Voice and Sing? And if you don't mind standing up if you're able to, that would be wonderful. Is that right? The right key? Got that?
I think so.
Lift every. Here's your starting pitch. Lift every voice. Here we go.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
Excellent. Thank you. Awesome. Great. Children, you can leave the stage. Yeah, they're awesome. To give you an idea of who these children are, they are a few singers in all 5 of our Grand Monadnock Youth Choirs. It's not one choir today. I put out the word, and whoever was available to come today and wanted to did, from all 5 choirs. So we have people from grades 2 through 12 who are singing today for you. Yeah. Thanks. Next, we'll be hearing from the Reverend Elsa Worth from St. James Episcopal Church.
So, Nelson Mandela once said, Nelson Mandela? Not on.
Now it's on.
Nelson Mandela once said, courageous people do not fear forgiving for the sake of peace. Perhaps you know as well as I do what kind of strong backbone it takes to forgive sometimes. It's hard to let go of resentments and grudges and to move forward into forgiveness instead of simmering in contempt. To choose to be in right relationship over just being right. I'm pretty sure that we could all use a dose of this particular kind of courage in our nation today. It seems impossible to speak of forgiveness when a serious wrong has been committed, or when those who have been trampled by injustice are often the ones who have the least power to do anything about it. Mandela once said, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way that it treats its children. He knew that the least powerful in society is like the canary in the minefield of the health of the whole. And if a child is not provided their basic needs of education and literacy, the health of the whole is at stake. Mandela knew that if anyone is oppressed or persecuted, no one is truly free. While it had become time that it was time for apartheid to go, that it was finally time to set free the majority of South Africans who had been held back and held down by a completely unjust and unequal system in South Africa, Mandela had the wisdom to know that for real healing, there or anyone else or anywhere else, the real healing for the soul of their society, there was a need for forgiveness, for healing and reconciliation, for everyone, black, white, oppressed and oppressor. He knew that if those who held power were not transformed by the changes that they were making, the oppression would just find another avenue to keep going, unabated. But I can barely imagine, but maybe we can, the enormity of the changes that Mandela was navigating as a leader And imagine the challenge of holding a nation together that deeply polarized, deeply seated in prejudice, entrenched in patterns of greed, and with fierce tribal pride and anger. Maybe we can imagine it. Mandela stood in the eye of this powerful storm as an amazing leader, stood for peace and reconciliation in the midst of that chaos, and did not shrink back, and directly addressed the gaping wounds. And with the help of Bishop Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they found a way there to lead the people through to the other side, despite the intense volatility of their times. You know, he not only didn't shrink from conflict, he recognized it as a part of the process of healing, a necessary ripping off of the bandage that had so long covered great ugliness. He ripped it off so the infected and ugly wound of hatred could be exposed to the sunlight and could finally begin to heal from the inside, the deepest layers outward. Forgiveness. It takes great courage to choose forgiveness over simply trying to pretend everything's okay or acting as if it is. And when things get as divided and as polarized as they had in South Africa, when disagreement and polarization seem to be reaching a boiling point, Mandela knew that that is the moment when people are finally beginning to wake up to what is right and what is wrong. When people stop pretending that everything's okay, the moment of change and instability can indicate that people are waking up and speaking out and becoming willing to defend what is right not just for few, but for all. Finding courageous backbone to stand up for what is right and seek true forgiveness and reconciliation for all. And so for those who spoke on behalf of the children then and wanted to lift them out of poverty with education and literacy, free from oppression, those who spoke courageously for courage and were finally enacting the justice that had been denied for so long, Nelson Mandela said, "When the water starts boiling, it is foolish to turn off the heat." So today we stand together on the 100th birthday of this great man, one of history's greatest leaders, to support, along with others all over the world today, more literacy, more education, more empowerment for children, more love, more forgiveness, more reconciliation for all God's children, that they may continue to work for the dignity and respect of every human being. And I wouldn't be here without saying a prayer. So let's go into the spirit of prayer. God of reconciliation, grant that your holy and life-giving spirit may so move every human heart that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatred cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace. Amen.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Patience Stoddard, who has been a Unitarian Universalist minister for what to me seems like forever. For her lifetime, she says.
Good afternoon. Today I wanted to just share a couple of very short thoughts and remarks about hope. As I look at what is happening in this nation of ours that was founded on the dream of liberty and equality, hope is not at the top of my list of feelings. I don't know how you have seen what's been happening to our democracy and to our political fiber and to our commitment to a clean earth and to those less fortunate and in need of asylum and support. But as I have looked out over the last few months of our country, after I've read the newspaper and listened to one more show on NPR, I will admit that I have felt pretty downcast. A little afraid, perhaps, even. So when I was reading about what Nelson Mandela has written, some of the quotes and pieces of his speeches, the sentence, "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." It is that statement that has been resonating with me over these past few days. Because actually I don't feel that hope is so much a choice as it is a necessity. It is not so much a feeling as it is a commitment. It is not so much of an assessment of what is as it is a promise of what is possible. In a letter to Winnie Mandela back in 1969, Mandela wrote, "I am fundamentally an optimist." Now keep in mind, the man who is writing this has already been in prison for a decade. Whether this comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. But part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed towards the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not, I simply could not give myself up to despair. There are many things that we are being called to do at this particular threshold in history, but one of them, I believe, is to be hopers, to be people who carry the torch of hope, and to be movers, and maybe even shakers. This is the time when the water is boiling, that it is time to turn up the heat. It is time to remember how far we've come. It is time to remember the life of this man in South Africa who had more hardships and tragedy in his lifetime than most of us would have in generations, and yet who never gave up his hope, who kept his eyes on the sun, and even when the only place he could walk was back and forth in his solitary confinement cell, he kept moving. I want to close with some words from a poem, Beginners, by the poet Denise Levertov. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only just begun. We have only just begun to imagine justice and mercy, only begun to envision how we might live as siblings, not as oppressors. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Surely it cannot drag in the silt all that is innocent. Not yet. Not yet. There is too much broken that must be mended, too much hurt we have done to each other that cannot yet be forgiven. We have only begun to know the power that is in us, if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud.
Thank you, Patience. And now we'll hear from Dottie Morris from Keene State College.
Okay, as with any birthday party, there's a cake over there, and I'm between you and the cake. So please bear with me, and then let them eat cake. Oh, no, that's not the right thing. On what would be Mr. Mandela's 100th birthday, I would like to start by acknowledging the first peoples who walked this land, who nurtured the environment, who are still here despite all the things we have done to render evidence of their existence invisible. I think Mr. Mandela would deeply understand why this acknowledgement is a significant thing to do, since he was clearly in a battle to help his people remember, not just recall who they were, but to literally reconnect with who they are. The process of oppression creates conditions where people are dismembered, disconnected, and dispossessed. He spent his entire life engaged in this task of helping people undo the consequences of this process. And he did it at a great personal price. We must take this opportunity to learn from Mr. Mandela's life. And I just have a group of questions. How might we embolden ourselves to do things within our immediate environment to ensure that every person is granted the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, free from state-related or interpersonal abuse? How might we embolden ourselves to live in a way that is consistent with the values we say we embrace as individuals, a society, and a country? How do we embolden ourselves to use Mr. Mandela's life as an example of how can we do the impossible, or the things we think are impossible? According to Mr. Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. We must realize, as I'm sure he did, that the stakes are far too high and that failure is not an option, especially if we love our children. How do we embolden ourselves to work day in and day out with understanding that our actions to create a just world are not insignificant, even when it feels like we're not making progress? I am sure when Mr. Mandela was in prison, I'm sure he was conscious of how each act he engaged in was the building blocks to liberation of his people. I'm sure that is why he persevered under such inhumane conditions. For his eyes, heart, mind, and soul were set on freedom, not just for himself, but for all of those who suffered under the unjust system. How might we today embolden ourselves to have the strength and conviction to do what Representative John Lewis asked not only of others but of himself, and that is to be consistent and persistent and try to use the love force to guide our actions? I had the honor of being in Cape Town, South Africa on Mr. Mandela's 90th birthday. It was really weird to realize that was 10 years ago. I felt honored to be in the presence of people who had survived this oppressive South African regime, and how they were so excited to celebrate having Mr. Mandela for 90 years. It was through this celebration I began to realize the power of being connected to others, and that I should live in a way that demonstrates my capacity to internalize that connection. I was able to embody the meaning of the phrase, "None of us is free if one of us is in chains." And I think the Lakota people puts it best when they say we are all related. I think through Mr. Mandela's life, he was able to help others remember in such a way that they were able to reconnect with their own humanity. I'm sure you've heard stories of how he changed the lives of his jailers, and I'm sure that wasn't an easy task. So how might we work together to keep Mr. Mandela's spirit of action alive today? We are related to Mr. Mandela, and we must use the life force that he has set forward to move forward. To do anything less would be a dishonor to his life, his survival, and all the work he has done so far. And I'm going to borrow from Ilma Goldman, because I think that Mr. Mandela would even agree with this one. And I'm paraphrasing, but she said, if we're not going to dance, I can't come to the revolution. So I think he would be in agreement that music and dance is a critical part to re-energize, to do the work that we need to do. And I'm going to ask you on this day to celebrate in that way. Thank you.
right, and now we'll hear from the GMYC Administrative Director, Susan McNeil, about the Mandela Library Project.
At his 90th birthday, Nelson Mandela said, "The world remains beset by so much human suffering, poverty, and deprivation. It is in your hands to make of our world a better one for all, especially the poor, vulnerable, and marginalized." Mandela believed strongly that children could be liberated from poverty through improved literacy. Since 2011, the Mandela Literacy Project has provided more than 100,000 South African children with daily access to reading materials through containerized libraries, with an additional 100,000 having access to reading clubs and books. At a school dedication in June 1995, he declared, "Our children are the rock on which our future will be built, our greatest asset as a nation. They will be the leaders of our country, the creators of our national wealth, those who care for and protect our people." Today, the Mandela Foundation continues to build upon Mandela's life and devotion to children with the Literacy Project. Go to the Grand Monadnock Youth Choir's website to follow the link where you can help bring literacy to thousands of South African children. Thank you.
All right. So now is a time when everyone please join me in singing Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now
speaking with the representatives from the literacy program, the Nelson Mandela Foundation Literacy Program in South Africa. I asked them, how can we best celebrate Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday? What would he like? And they said, you know what? If you're going to sing happy birthday, Nelson Mandela wants to hear the Stevie Wonder happy birthday.
Happy birthday.